They said power was written in treaties, in signed documents, in firm handshakes across polished tables. But history has always shown us, it is not always the mighty who shake the earth. Sometimes it is the whisper of one voice, the courage of one heart, and the will of one soul that rewrites the script of nations. And today we speak of how one Indian, standing tall in the face of giants, shook the balance of U.S. India relations and revealed truths that leaders wished to hide. They said the weight of nations rests on the shoulders of presidents, prime ministers, and generals. But history whispers a different story to those who are willing to listen. It tells us that sometimes the future of two powerful nations can hinge not on armies or weapons, but on the strength of a single decision. A decision made not in the comfort of power, but in the fire of conviction. That is where true courage is born, not in the halls of marble or the offices gilded with authority, but in the heart of someone who dares to act when the world expects silence. One Indian, armed not with tanks or treaties, but with integrity, stepped forward and chose the harder road. That choice, though ridiculed and resisted, carried the power to change the destiny of nations. A single choice may seem insignificant to those who live their lives conforming to the tide, but it is always the ripple that becomes the wave. That choice was more than personal, it was historical. It was a no that echoed louder than 1,000 agreements, a refusal that shook the pillars of diplomacy, a declaration that the truth of one's nation cannot be bartered away for fleeting promises. For too long, the world believed that power lies only in the hands of governments. But what happened here reminds us that sometimes one voice, pure and unshaken, can outweigh the signatures of two governments sitting across oceans. Think about it. Every great movement, every uprising, every liberation began with a single choice: a man choosing to stand when told to sit, a woman choosing to speak when ordered to be silent, a nation choosing dignity over dependence. In this moment, one Indian chose not to be a shadow in the room, not to bow beneath pressure, but to hold up the torch of truth. That act was not just defiance. It was a redefinition of power. It was the reminder that authority without morality is fragile, that treaties built on lies will always collapse, and that no matter how powerful an empire may appear, it trembles before honesty. The beauty of that single choice lies in its universality. It was not just for India, not just against America. It was for every human being who has ever been told that they are too small to matter. This moment teaches us that you are never too small. You are never too powerless. For within you lies the ability to shift tides, to bend history, to stand tall against forces far greater than yourself. That choice made by one Indian was not just a political act. It was a mirror held up to humanity, reminding us that change is never birthed by the majority, but by the courage of the minority willing to act. And yes, choices come at a cost, they always do. To say no when everyone else is saying yes is to invite criticism, opposition, and even isolation. But what is the worth of a life lived in comfort if it is devoid of principle? What is the worth of alliances built on falsehoods if they cannot withstand the weight of truth? That single act of courage was not just about breaking ties. It was about building a foundation stronger than deceit. It was about showing the world that dignity is never negotiable, that sovereignty is never for sale, and that one individual can become the conscience of an entire nation. The first keynote of this story is simple yet profound. Never underestimate the power of one choice. It may look small to the eyes of the world, but within it lies the thunder of transformation. For it is not the wealth of nations, nor the might of their armies, that writes history. It is the single soul who chooses conviction over convenience, courage over compromise, and truth over temporary peace. That is how one Indian reminded the world that history bows to those who dare. Truth has always been a restless traveler, moving from mouth to mouth, place to place, seeking those willing to carry it, even when the weight feels unbearable. It does not rest in silence, nor does it thrive in comfort. Truth arrives uninvited, sometimes as a whisper, sometimes as a storm, and when it lands, it demands to be spoken. In this story, truth was not the kind that could be ignored or buried beneath diplomatic smiles. It was the kind that tears down illusions, that strips away false promises, that exposes the soft underbelly of power. And when one Indian revealed it, the world was forced to listen, even those who wished to close their ears. For too long, great powers have written narratives as though they were the only authors of history. They have built alliances, brokered deals, and shaped perceptions to favor their interests. But truth is not their servant. It does not kneel before flags, borders, or titles. It lives beyond treaties and governments. And when truth steps forward, no empire is immune to its piercing light. One Indian dared to speak the inconvenient truth, not because it was safe, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. In that act, the comfortable illusions surrounding India relations began to crack, and behind the polished speeches lay the raw reality that had been hidden for too long. Truth is uncomfortable because it does not flatter. It does not wear perfume to make itself more pleasant. It arrives naked, exposing not just others, but also those who speak it. To reveal truth is to risk everything: reputation, position, safety. Yet it is also the only act that can dismantle lies so deeply entrenched they begin to look like reality. When that Indian voice exposed what many knew but few dared to say, it carried the thunder of a storm. It was not the loudness of the voice that mattered. It was the clarity, the undeniable ring of honesty that made the powerful tremble. Think of how fragile falsehoods truly are. They may seem solid, built on layers of propaganda, cemented by years of diplomacy, reinforced by promises, but the moment truth touches them, they shatter like glass. That is why powerful nations often fear a single truth more than they fear an army. An army can be fought with weapons. Truth cannot. It is relentless. It seeps into conversations, into the conscience of people, into the very soil of history. No wall is high enough, no propaganda strong enough, no censorship tight enough to stop it from spreading once it has been spoken. This keynote reminds us that speaking truth is not simply about revealing facts. It is about realigning reality with justice. One Indian's courage was not about embarrassing a foreign power or humiliating leaders. It was about holding up a mirror that showed both nations what lay beneath the handshake: imbalance, exploitation, and broken promises. For the United States, it was a reminder that dominance cannot disguise itself forever as friendship. For India, it was a call to recognize its own worth, to stop bending under the weight of false partnerships, and to rise into a position of dignity. And for the world, this act was a parable. It taught that truth is not the privilege of the strong, but the weapon of the brave. Even when one stands alone, truth multiplies its power, because it speaks not just to ears, but to hearts. That Indian did not just speak for himself. He spoke for every citizen who had felt the burden of lies, for every nation that had been told to remain quiet, for every voice that had been dismissed as insignificant. His act became a torch, reminding humanity that truth is not negotiable, not disposable, not a currency to be traded. The second keynote is this: truth, once spoken, can never be silenced again. It may be resisted, ridiculed, or denied, but it cannot be erased. It will ripple through time, cut through illusions, and expose the core of reality. When one Indian dared to lift truth into the light, he reminded us all that it takes only one honest voice to bring down a wall of deception, and that courage is never wasted when it is used to serve what is real. Strength has never been measured in numbers alone, though the world often forgets this truth. Nations flaunt their armies, their weapons, their wealth, and their flags as proof of greatness, but history is a stern teacher. Time and again, it reminds us that true strength is not born in the clanging of steel or the swelling of treasuries. True strength flows from the hearts of people, from their ability to stand upright when every force tries to bend them. It is in this quiet, unyielding spirit that nations discover who they really are. And when one Indian refused to bow, he reminded the world that courage can weigh more than the might of empires. Consider the mighty civilizations that once ruled the earth. They had vast armies, boundless riches, and territories stretching far beyond horizons. Yet, when the spirit of the people inside them decayed, when their moral foundation cracked, they fell. No weapon, no army, no throne could save them. Power that lacks character is like a house built on sand. It will crumble the moment storms arrive. That is why strength cannot be counted in missiles or soldiers. It must be measured in integrity, in resilience, in the unshakable conviction to stand firm when compromise would be easier. When that Indian stood unafraid of pressure, he demonstrated the essence of true strength. America, with all its global influence and prestige, suddenly saw itself challenged not by another empire, but by a single voice that would not yield. That voice carried more weight than fleets of ships or squadrons of jets, because it spoke from a place deeper than politics. It spoke from the eternal source of human dignity. It declared, without needing permission, that a nation's soul cannot be bought or bullied. And that is a strength no superpower can easily dismiss. Strength is not loud, though many mistake noise for power. Strength is often silent, steady, and still. It is not the aggressor who rages across the battlefield, but the one who holds the line with unflinching resolve. That Indian became a living symbol of such strength, not shaking under threats, not silenced by promises, not distracted by glittering offers. The refusal to bend was in itself a declaration that India's dignity was not negotiable. And through that act, the world saw that the measure of a nation lies not in how it yields to power, but in how it resists it. Every act of strength, however, inspires beyond the moment. This was not simply about U.S. India relations. It was a lesson carved into the conscience of the world. It was a reminder that each person carries within them a reservoir of power they may not even realize. Just as one Indian stood tall, so too can any individual anywhere rise above intimidation, above manipulation, above the illusions of weakness. The true strength of a nation is reflected in the courage of its people, and when even one person awakens to this truth, an entire nation is lifted. Strength of character is contagious. When it is displayed, it ignites a fire in those who witness it. That Indian's defiance was more than a solitary act. It was a spark that showed millions that dignity can stand taller than fear, that truth can withstand threats, that courage can outshine power. And just as strength does not need numbers to exist, it does not need recognition to endure. Even if the world tries to dismiss it, genuine strength has a way of echoing across time, planting seeds for future generations to rise with the same resilience. The third keynote is clear. True strength is not about domination, but about defiance, not about numbers, but about character. It cannot be measured in size or scale, but only in courage. One Indian, standing firm, proved that even the greatest powers must acknowledge the strength of the human spirit, and that lesson will outlast the fall of armies, the signing of treaties, and the shifting of alliances. For it is a truth as old as time itself. Empires may rise and fall, but strength born of conviction never dies. Every ending carries with it the seed of a beginning, though in the moment of fracture it may appear as nothing more than ruin. When ties between nations crack, when alliances begin to falter, the world often rushes to label it as disaster, but those who look deeper understand that within disruption lies the possibility of rebirth. The breaking apart of something old is often the clearing of ground for something new. And so, when U.S.-India relations seemed to shake under the weight of truth, it was not simply destruction. It was transformation unfolding in its rawest form. Disruption, by its very nature, is uncomfortable. It disturbs the familiar and unsettles the established. It strips away the illusion of stability and forces people to confront what lies beneath. Yet it is only in such moments that real change becomes possible. Just as a seed must break open to grow into a tree, just as a cocoon must split for the butterfly to emerge, nations too must endure breaking points before they can step into new destinies. The collapse of a facade may sting, but it frees both nations and individuals to stand on foundations built not of pretense, but of truth. For too long, relationships between powerful countries have often been woven with threads of compromise and imbalance. Promises made for convenience, partnerships shaped by necessity, arrangements designed to benefit one side more than the other. When one Indian shattered that illusion with courage, the disruption that followed was not merely about politics. It was about dignity. It was about demanding that India step into its rightful place as an equal partner, not a subordinate one. Such disruption was necessary because without it, the cycle of dependence would have continued unchallenged. Chaos is often misread as catastrophe, when in truth it is the birthplace of clarity. The stirring of waters that once seemed calm is what allows hidden truths to rise to the surface. The cracks in alliances are not signs of weakness. They are opportunities to rebuild with stronger mortar, with honesty replacing deception, with fairness replacing exploitation. What seems like a collapse is often the unveiling of a new horizon waiting to be claimed. And in this moment of rupture, India found not loss, but liberation, the freedom to see itself no longer through the lens of another's power, but through the strength of its own spirit. The world, too, learns from such disruption. Observers from afar may have seen the tension, the broken agreements, the strained smiles, but beneath all of that lay a lesson for every nation. Dependency is a chain, and chains are meant to be broken. If relations must fracture for dignity to be preserved, then the fracture is not a failure but a victory. A nation that can endure the breaking of ties without losing itself is a nation that is truly free. And individuals, too, can take this truth into their own lives. Sometimes the relationships that must end, the partnerships that must dissolve, are the very ones that open the door to independence and self-respect. Every disruption is a test. It asks, will you cling to the comfort of the old, even if it no longer serves you, or will you embrace the uncertainty of the new, trusting that transformation is waiting? One Indian, by daring to disrupt, answered that question not just for himself, but for an entire country. He showed that the courage to let go of false security is what paves the path to real strength. The world may have called it destruction, but history will remember it as the moment of awakening, the breaking of chains, the clearing of clouds so that the sun could shine more brightly on a nation ready to rise. The fourth keynote reminds us that endings are never just endings. They are thresholds. They are the crossing over from shadows into light, from compromise into independence, from pretense into truth. Disruption, though painful, is not the enemy. it is the midwife of transformation. And from that breaking point, a stronger, freer India began to emerge, carrying with it the promise of a future not dictated by others, but defined by its own voice. Legacy is not the property of those who hold thrones, nor is it secured by those who sign treaties under the glow of chandeliers. Legacy belongs to those who choose courage over comfort, those who step into the fire of history and dare to leave behind footprints that cannot be erased. It is easy for leaders to believe that their names alone will endure, that their speeches and agreements will echo through the centuries. Yet time is a stern judge. It does not preserve empty gestures or hollow promises. It preserves the moments when an individual stood against the tide and chose truth. That is why the legacy of one Indian rises tall, a monument not carved in stone, but etched into the spirit of a people. To create legacy is not to live without fear, but to live with purpose greater than fear. The act that seemed small in the eyes of many was, in truth, monumental. By refusing to bend, by choosing dignity over subservience, this Indian did more than disrupt relations between nations. He inscribed a message on the heart of history. That message was simple. No matter how mighty a nation may seem, its power cannot overshadow the courage of a single soul. Empires will write their narratives, but it is the defiant who will be remembered. Legacy, in its purest form, is not about titles, wealth, or recognition. It is about awakening. When one voice rises, it awakens countless others who thought themselves too weak, too small, too insignificant to matter. The act of standing firm against the United States was not simply about politics. It was about giving every citizen, every dreamer, every silent struggler the gift of belief. Belief that they too could make history. Belief that they too could carry dignity as their shield and truth as their sword. Legacy is not a crown one wears. It is a fire one lights in others, and in that fire generations find their strength. This act also revealed something greater about the nature of legacy. It is never confined to one lifetime. Long after the treaties crumble, long after the speeches fade, long after the names of politicians are forgotten, the courage of this one Indian will still ripple across time. Children will hear the story and learn that strength is not measured by the size of a nation, but by the size of a heart. Young leaders will rise and know that to challenge giants is not madness but destiny. Nations will remember that sovereignty is not a gift bestowed by others, but a right defended by those who dare. Legacy has the power to shame the powerful and elevate the humble. Those who once believed they could control narratives will find themselves exposed by history's gaze. For when one Indian chose to act with courage, he shifted the scale of memory. He proved that legacy is not determined by the applause of the present moment, but by the judgment of the future, and the future always honors the brave. The greatest lesson in legacy is this: one person is never truly alone when they act with courage, though they may stand isolated in the moment, though they may face ridicule, opposition, or silence. Their actions carry the weight of every soul who longs for truth. One Indian may have stood outwardly alone, but in truth he stood with millions who hungered for justice, with countless others across time who dared to defy empires, with the eternal spirit of humanity that refuses to be enslaved. That is the secret of legacy. It belongs not to one but to all who are inspired by it. The fifth keynote is a testament that history does not belong to the comfortable, the compliant, or the silent. It belongs to those who stand when others bow, who speak when others hide, who act when others wait. One Indian, one act, one moment became more powerful than the diplomacy of nations. That is the legacy that endures, the kind that cannot be erased, the kind that does not fade, the kind that reminds every generation to come that courage is the only currency that never loses its value.